Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Webb, and I welcome you to the fourth webinar in our Superintendents ESSA webinar series. Today's session will focus on Title II, Preparing, Training, and Recruiting High-Quality Teachers, Principals, and Other School Leaders, and on Title III, Language Instruction for English Learners and Immigrant Students. Many of you are familiar with our protocols for participation in the webinars, but let's quickly review for those of us joining for the first time. Everyone is on mute to eliminate all background noise. If you have a question or would like to make a comment, please use the chat function on the right of your screen, as this is the best way to communicate with us during the webinar. We usually try to conduct a few poll questions, but unfortunately our polling feature is not working today. We apologize for that in advance. And just a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. You can find the recorded webinars in multiple locations, such as the ESSA resources page, the Superintendent's Digest, and on our CT Course Standards site. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today. Normally we have two individuals that are joining us, but Ellen Cohn, our Deputy Commissioner, is taking the lead on this today. Now, normally we like to see who's joining us on the line, and thank you for joining us. We're going to bypass our first poll question, so I'm going to have you keep clicking.
Absolutely.
And Ellen's going to kind of jump right in to a review of our ESSA stakeholder engagement and our timeline.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this, our fourth webinar. Let's talk about, this slide is not new if you've tuned into some of our previous webinars. This is not a new slide, but it's worth repeating, especially if you have an interest in getting involved as a stakeholder in input into the plan. Our Commissioner has been conducting roundtables, both as a follow-up to the State Board of Education 5-year comprehensive plan, as well as a look ahead to the Connecticut State Plan we'll be developing for ESSA. She's been doing that since at least the month of September. We, in addition, have a partnership with both all of our RESCs and CERC for engaging stakeholder groups. The good news is we've collected contact information for over 80 stakeholder groups, and we invite them regularly to focus groups in an effort to try to reach as many people as possible. Jen, we've had some communication recently, and we're in the dozens and dozens of focus groups at this point.
Yes, we are.
So we feel very confident we will meet the same level of stakeholder engagement that we had for our board plan, and we actually have hopes that we might exceed it. When you put together the stakeholder engagement for the 5-year board plan, the engagement we're trying to conduct for ESSA, as well as the work that Ajit, my partner on these webinars, Ajit Kapalakrishnan, our Chief Performance Officer, has tried to do around our new accountability system, as well as stakeholder engagement for our ESEA waiver, we've really made tremendous headway in getting as many people as possible engaged. If you're sitting here in the webinar thinking, well, I haven't been engaged, we'd like you to have contact information, and we'll be sharing that shortly. We've been working, all of our leaders and staff who engage regularly in meetings with outside stakeholders, meaning largely educators, but very often it can be parents as well or other community groups. We try to talk about where we are in the ESSA process, and we count that as part of our stakeholder engagement. We also have a survey that's posted on our website, and we're pleased to say that we have both an English and a Spanish version available. If you go to the home page for CFDE, you'll find it in the right-hand column highlighted in red. We provide monthly updates to our State Board of Education, and we will be engaging with the Connecticut General Assembly's Education Committee to hold a public forum on ESSA. It was supposed to be this week, but it's actually been postponed. It'll be held at the Legislative Office Building, or we refer to it, affectionately refer to it as the LOB, on November 30th, 2016. When you take a look at our timeline, I'll go through this quickly. We're heavily involved in stakeholder engagement. We see this as the input phase. We have not written a word of our state plan yet, and we did that purposely so that we can receive lots of feedback on key questions from stakeholders. We begin writing in earnest next month, and that continues through the month of February. It's an iterative process that we'll be conducting internally. We will then present it to our board and post it. We're hoping and estimating for March 2nd. we have an entire month for public comment from March 2nd to the 31st. The plan will be posted in a very prominent place on our website, most likely the homepage. And then we're required to submit the plan to the U.S. Department of Ed on or before July 1st, 2017. So it is, as part of ESSA, every time that the law is reenacted, it is required that we make sure that we consult and coordinate with other federal programs, and some of those programs are found within ESSA, but there are programs that are otherwise outside of ESSA. For example, I want to point out to you WIOA. You'll see a double star in the left-hand column. That is the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, and that was just recently reauthorized with hundreds upon hundreds of stakeholders. And so we're going to obviously align our goals in ESSA to the goals of WIOA. I happen to sit on the Early Childhood Cabinet, and so we will be coordinating with both the Office of Early Childhood and community providers and a whole variety of stakeholders in early learning. And so we will ensure that our plan is again aligned to the Head Start Act, the Child Care and Development Grant Act. In fact, Jennifer, we have a stakeholder group dedicated to early learning coming up. Is it this week or next?
It's next Monday.
Next Monday. So we're doing everything in our power to make sure that we have as many people as possible engaged actively in this process, and also to ensure that all of our goals are aligned so that people on the receiving end do not get a jumble of different goals and objectives, but in fact have a nice coherent plan from the state to follow. So let's talk about what's on the agenda for today. I'll be providing a general overview of Title II and Title III programs and the funding associated with them. In addition, we'll talk about what are the requirements for LEAs related to ESSA in Title II and III. That should be a 3. I apologize. It says Title II and II. That should be a 3. And then our third objective today is Title II and III, components of the Connecticut Consolidated State Plan. So it's really important that we understand the purpose of Title II before we talk about the funding. And going back all the way to 1965, Title II has always been directed towards its funding to improve the quality and effectiveness of teachers. This, again, if you'll recall from previous webinars, ESSA was a piece of civil rights legislation. Lyndon Johnson, in his later years, said that it was his proudest accomplishment, which is really saying something, providing federal funding to improve the quality of education for poor students so that there weren't the gross inequities that were seen at the time. Improving the quality and effectiveness of teachers is really important in Title I schools. In addition, increasing the number of teachers, principals, and other school leaders who are effective in improving academic achievement. Being able to direct your energies towards the highest, most effective, or most probably effective strategies in a classroom is hugely important, and Title II funds should be directed towards professional development that makes that a reality for teachers. And last but not least, ensuring equity, and this will come up over and over again in the slides this afternoon. It is really important and a major tenet of ESSA that low-income and minority students have equal access to high-quality, effective teachers, principals, and other school leaders to the same degree as their peers in other communities or of other races. In other words, they should not be being taught at disproportionate rates by teachers who are working out of their field. That might be a long-term sub or someone who's not certified in the subject they're teaching. That might be unqualified, a series of daily subs where the person may not have the skills necessary to effectively teach their students, or otherwise ineffective teachers. In Connecticut, we've developed what we call the equity plan. It's a federal requirement And we now work intensively with 8 school districts who have disproportionate rates, and we're working to make sure that we do everything humanly possible to equalize and provide greater access for our students. This is an ongoing challenge, and we'll talk about it more in a little bit. I want to point out to you that one of the biggest challenges for Connecticut is our shortage areas. It's not unique to our state, and in fact, we are required by federal law to report out on the shortage areas, which are subjects where we do not have enough qualified candidates. And I'm going to take a moment to read to you the list. Bilingual education, pre-K-12, comprehensive special education, K-12, intermediate administrator, that is the certification required to become a school administrator or a district administrator. And I have to point out that we have it as a shortage area in the field, although we have a tremendous number of candidates with this certification who are not applying for positions. So sometimes we have a talent pool, but we don't have people moving towards those positions, and that's why intermediate administrator is on the list. Mathematics, you've all heard about the need for more STEM. Mathematics and science, 712, are both on these lists. We also have a shortage in the area of school library and media specialists. School psychologists are becoming a shortage area. Speech language pathology, I know I was last in district about 3.5 years ago, and it was a concern then. It continues to be a persistent shortage area. Technology education is number 9 on the list, and world language has recently joined the list as well. In addition to subject area shortage areas, another issue for, especially related to equity, is we have a student body in Connecticut that's currently 44% diverse, and by that I mean racially, ethnically, linguistically diverse, and yet of the 52,000 employed certified teachers in Connecticut, only 8% are racially, ethnically, and linguistically diverse. That translates to about 4,100 educators. And when you look at 52,000 versus 4,100 educators, you can see that this is really not good representation of modern life in America or in Connecticut. And the department is really dedicated to making sure that minority teacher recruitment is a top priority. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we have a number of opportunities to discuss and for you to become involved. Feel free to reach out to myself, ellen.cohn@ct.gov, or our Chief Talent Officer, sarah.barzee, B-A-R-Z-E-E, @ct.gov. Okay, Title II, there's some big ideas that folks need to know regarding ESSA and this section of the law. It's really important to understand that some of the requirements around educator evaluation that were required under our ESEA flexibility waiver going back as far as 2013 are no longer required around under ESSA. So there's been some changes to both federal policy as well as federal legislation. The changes to educator evaluation previously came out of the U.S. Department of Education, so it was more of a policy shift than it was actually a part of legislation. That said, it's important to realize that we have a diverse group of stakeholders in what's called the Performance Evaluation Advisory Committee, or PEAC as we like to refer to them, who back in 2012 adopted guidelines for evaluation, and then in February of 2014 they adopted additional flexibilities. Connecticut at this point has no plans to change educator evaluation, and that does not mean that PEAC may not come up with shifts or changes to it, but we feel fairly confident that the process we have in place now is really leading to deep conversations about teacher performance, and hopefully assessment data is being used in effective ways. That said, it's important to point out that Title II, if you use Title II funds to fund at the state level a teacher, a specific educator evaluation program, there are requirements under the law for reporting and how you use those funds. Connecticut has not used federal funds. We actually have a separate stream of state funding for our teacher evaluation program. You can see once again in bullet number 2 that the equity issue of making sure that Title I schools and the students that attend there are not served at disproportionate rates by teachers that are not as experienced or are out of field or are judged to be ineffective. Very big priority and will continue to be so until that problem is resolved. If you'll recall, districts submit their educator evaluation plans, and at this point last year we told districts that if their plan is unchanged, they do not need to submit it over and over again. So that's an effort on our part to reduce paperwork. Let's see, Tier 2, on our last bullet there, it also separately authorizes an incentive program to look at innovative educator evaluation systems. And again, that competitive grant system is really not something that we're going to take advantage of at this time, and I'll explain more when we get to the funding. I think it will make a lot more sense. So we'll move on to the next slide. So what is Title II funding in Connecticut? When I started to really become deeply involved in this reauthorization of the law, I found it very, very helpful to understand the scope of the funding we receive in Connecticut. So if you look at our districts or our LEAs, the Title II funds that districts receive range from, wow, look at that, $323 to $2,800,000+. So there is quite the range, and again, Title II funds are a formula, and that formula at the local level is based on the number of students in Title I schools. So you can see there may be the 323 mark, maybe for a district that only has one small elementary school that is a Title I school, and the $2,800,000 plus may actually be for a large district where all of their schools are Title I schools. So the state of Connecticut in 16-17 is going to receive about $21 million. But here's the big caveat in Title II. Look at bullet number 3. We are on the losing end of a formula change at the federal level. Over the next 6 years, Connecticut stands to lose approximately $5 million of that $21 million figure. We will be losing $5 million of that. So our allocation from the federal government after 6 more years will be closer to $15 million than it is to $21 million. And so unfortunately, Title II will reduce. The good news is, as I've stated in previous webinars, because of the hard work of our both state and federal legislature, we have our Title I funds are secure, and that's the biggest pot of money and the one that would really be a challenge. While $5 million is a hard hit for our local districts, we're going to do everything we can at the state level to not further impact that. So let's move on to our next slide. And it's a poll, which won't be happening today.
It won't happen. We apologize.
Yeah, that's too bad. For some reason, the polling feature is not working today. What's that?
I was just wondering if you want to give them a moment to reflect
I might
on
actually, well, and you might want to reflect, but let me speak to this as well, this poll. Thanks, Jen. That's actually a great idea. It's really important that folks understand what Title II funds can be used for. And if there's superintendents and assistant superintendents or other leaders on the phone, sometimes things become a form of urban legend where you hear, oh, you can't use Title II funds for that, or you can't use Title III funds for that. And it really, unless you're willing to go in and look at the law or the regulations, many of these things take on a life of their own. And so in the spirit of transparency, I want you to know all of the options, with the exception of E, are legitimate ways to spend your Title II funds. Hiring teachers to reduce class size, I'll start with D. It's important to know that under previous versions of ESSA, teacher salaries could be paid out of Title II funds to reduce class size. That has changed under ESSA in important ways. You may continue to pay existing teachers that were hired previously to reduce class size. You may continue to pay their salaries. But if you want to hire new teachers to reduce class size, that is no longer an option under federal rules. Let's look at C, helping educators address the needs of students who are at high risk. This has always been a very legitimate use of Title II funds, and that can be directed to teachers at the individual or small group level, at district-wide professional development, or at school-level professional development. PLCs, early intervention teams, all of those are possible allowable costs under Title II. PD, I think many of us who've worked at the district or central office level know that professional development, I know in my former district, Title II, we wouldn't have been able to do the high-level PD without those funds. Teacher mentoring and incentives are another completely legitimate one. So while it wasn't a poll, we used it as a little learning moment. So let's move on. I didn't list all 21 allowable expenditures, but let's take a quick look at other ones. And I won't read this slide to you, but I will tell you that if we were to do any of these activities at the state level, the federal law allows us to hold up to 5% of your funds, the local funds, for us to conduct activities at the state level. We have made an internal and actually now an external commitment that given that we are on the losing end of the $5 million, the State Department of Ed will only take the smallest amount required to administer the grant. There are several salaries here at the department that are paid for through this grant. Some of it is through some of those salaries are through teacher certification or others in the talent office. Without those funds, we wouldn't be able to do the work we're required to do, but we will not be holding back additional funds and then contracting with a consulting group or a professional development company or trying to build statewide programs ourselves, because we feel that every dollar we hold back, we're taking a dollar out of the local district's pockets. And so that has been our commitment almost from the beginning when we started reviewing information about ESSA last spring. So it's important for folks in districts to know that. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of Connecticut's equity plan, and I think I've spoken to a number of these bullets. You can see that we had to submit our first equity plan to the federal government in 2015. And again, the effort is to look at equalizing resources for low-income and minority students. And that includes, and it's probably the #1 resource, is effective teachers. We have focused on 8 equity districts, and I will read those off in a moment. But while you take a look at the strategies, I'll read the 8 districts that we are deeply involved with. The first one is Bridgeport with 21,000 plus students. The second is Hartford with 21,400 plus students. New Britain with 10,000 students. New Haven with 21,000 students. Norwich with 3,600 plus students. Waterbury with almost 19,000 students. West Haven with almost 6,000 students. And Windham with almost 3,200 students. That accounts for about 20% of Connecticut student enrollment of 105,000. By impacting these 8 districts, we keep the project to the degree that we hope to have an impact. We are more than willing to share strategies that we've been looking at. Let me give you a salient example. Many of our equity districts did not use what's called a stay interview, which is, we've all heard of exit interviews. When you give notice to leave your job, people want to know why you are leaving. Flip that, and the strategy is called the stay interview, which is to randomly select teachers at the beginning or end of each year and ask them what's working. Why are you staying? What can we do to make things better for you? Working conditions turn out to be one of the biggest impacts on teachers. It's not all about the money, and while folks appreciate good compensation, they will often stay in a challenging environment for less pay than they could get somewhere else because of their dedication to the task. But there is a breaking point at which working conditions, negativity, or faulty equipment, or not good school climate that may break the bank, and teachers will start to look elsewhere. Doing stay interviews helps you know, are you on the right track? This is really important work for HR directors, principals, and anyone else who's interested in maintaining a really positive workforce. I know among the equity districts, I've been so impressed to work with teachers who have 20, 25 years in the district in some of the most challenging environments that I know I personally have ever seen, both with the needs of kids coming in, potentially there's violence in the neighborhood, or there is students have more trauma, or students have more instability due to poverty. These teachers are really to be commended, and we want to do everything we can to continue to ensure that when we get new teachers, we keep them, we support them, and we train them. So that's part of our equity plan. If you're interested in more information, I gave you Sarah Barzzi's contact information earlier. She's the expert in this area, and I would refer you to her. But hopefully this gives you an idea of what we're trying to achieve here at the department. Let's talk about Title III. Title III, first and foremost, is dedicated to English learners, but it also is dedicated to immigrant students. In Connecticut, we have, I believe, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been quoted. I was thinking of migrant students. I don't have the number for immigrant students, but I'll try to get that for the next webinar. Immigrant students and English learners are covered under Title III. Driving significant improvement in their proficiency is what Title III should be directed toward. We have come so far in Connecticut in English language instruction and in English language scaffolding in the regular classroom, but there is still much to do. How do we, under Title III, now meaningfully incorporate English learners' progress towards language proficiency? For those of you that have worked with Title grants in the past, you'll recall that Title III required a district or school improvement plan, annual measurable objectives, AMOs, and we had to send letters year after year when our English language students did not meet proficiency. There's been a great deal of heated discussion around what's reasonable to expect for a student that doesn't speak English. It takes time. What's a good trajectory? It's not the same for each and every student. In the old days, under No Child Left Behind, we were penalized when students in their second year of English language instruction were taking tests, and we were being penalized because they were not they couldn't reach proficiency on the academic measures. We have incorporated on several levels. Let me unpack our accountability system. First and foremost, the progress of students towards English language proficiency as measured by LOS links, that's the test we give annually to English learners, forms C and D. Their progress and their proficiency is now part of our state accountability system. That is a huge shift. This measure is so important that it shouldn't be relegated to a separate little school or district improvement plan. It should be part of our total accountability system. In addition, the state of Connecticut has adopted what we call CELP or CELP, Connecticut English Language Proficiency Standards. They can be found on our webpage under Teaching and Learning. And those standards are very much 21st century. They're not solely focused on vocabulary. Students, despite a language barrier, can certainly engage in both their native language and in their burgeoning beginning English. They can engage in all kinds of higher order thinking, higher order expression, and those standards, those ideas of rigor are reflected in the new ELP standards. The assessment that we have adopted is the LOTS Links Form C and D, and a new requirement under ESSA is that we have a standardized and consistent process for identifying English learners, entering them into programs, and the criteria to exit. And Connecticut has a fairly consistent system, although there's a fair amount of flexibility. Let's just say it's loosely structured, but it will now become standardized across the entire state of Connecticut, and that is a federal requirement. Let's see, in addition, we are now required to set long-term goals for English language proficiency for our students, as well as measure English learners' graduation rates and their academic progress. So in some ways, you could say we're both turning up the light and turning up the heat when it comes to accountability. I'm actually excited at the opportunities this presents us in Connecticut. We have discussed ways to continue to arm classroom teachers with the ability to use scaffolding, differentiation. Many of the things we use for English learners in the classroom, actually all kinds of students benefit from. Would you agree, Jen?
Completely.
A former English language arts teacher here and a reading teacher, Jen can certainly agree. Oftentimes the strategies we use benefit everyone in the classroom. That said, we need to continue to work to make sure that our pre-service teachers, folks coming into the field, have a solid background and understand the proficiency levels of English learners, what to expect, how to communicate with a newcomer, what are the most important scaffolds that should be used every single day in every single subject in the classroom. And the department has some ideas on that, and as we develop our plan, we'll be happy to share more. And I think that's everything. Here's one point that's important to mention. Our new accountability system allows for the inclusion of former English learners. Remember this? As soon as the kids got good on their academic tests, they were no longer considered English learners. And so English learners, when we just used achievement levels, were forever performing poorly because they were still new English learners. Well, under our new system, we can include former English learners within the L subgroup for up to 4 years. This was previously 2. With respect to achievement reporting, that's the SPI, DPI that a school or a district receive. So you now, from an accountability perspective, quote, get credit for the higher achievement that students are making as they move through the continuum of English language learning.
So a quick question that's come up. Does the second bullet on this screen mean that EL students show progress in their lost link scores? Or is it referring to smarter balance scores?
It's their lost links scores. So in this particular case, when we say English language proficiency, that's are they getting better at English? And so progress towards that is now part of our accountability system.
And one other quick question before we transition to the next one. Are the annual letters still going to be required?
I do not believe so. I have to go back through the regulations, but because it's now part of the general accountability system, many of those Title III regulations have not have not turned out to be the case. Now, having said that, we have proposed regulations for Title III to which we responded, but the final regulations have not been published. They tell us end of the year, and that would make one think by December, but as you well know, we've also had a change in administration, and we're not sure if that will be delayed. I'm going to try to find a way to get that information out to folks. So if you want to send me an email, I'll be happy to respond regarding that, or perhaps we could put a information packet on, because I think it's worthy to ask that question, and I don't believe the letters are required. Thanks for those questions. I appreciate that. I feel like we're not alone here in a room doing a webinar. Thank you very much. Keep sending your questions. So, Title III, big ideas. In many ways, Connecticut is in very good shape. During our ESSA flexibility waiver, we adopted a set of English language proficiency standards that are aligned to our subject area standards. They are rigorous. They were vetted through many of our stakeholder groups of teachers and administrators that work with English learners. I'd say that's about a year and a half old now. I think it's a year and a half.
Yes.
And then adopting an assessment, we already spoke about that. LOTS Link C and D is our English language proficiency assessment. We will continue to pay for the LOTS Links. That was a change under Commissioner Wenzel when she was Chief Academic Officer, so I believe going back to 2014, that the state should be paying for that, just as the state pays for all the other state-mandated assessments. So we have no reason to believe we won't continue to pay for those assessments. We have two funding streams in Connecticut. We have a funding stream from the federal government for English learners, but we also have, substantial is too strong a word, we also have a moderate funding stream that's state-paid for bilingual education. And so those two streams have really helped us be able to do things like purchase the ELP assessment for all of our districts. We don't anticipate, although the legislative session has not even begun for this year, but we are hoping that there will be no cuts to the major components of our education budget, particularly as it relates to bilingual education or other special programs such as that. And we have made a proposed budget, and we have stated repeatedly that the needs of kids come first, and that if we have to trim other programs that don't directly touch children, we will. If we had to choose between something and a program and, say, for example, the school breakfast program will win. We really believe in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we have no intentions of changing how we spend money related to English learners. States have to establish, I had mentioned this earlier, we have to establish a standardized entrance and exit criteria for English learners. And again, I think we have a fair amount of agreement, but it will now become a very formal standardized process, which will be communicated. None of these changes would take effect before, at the earliest, the start of the school year next year, and we'll keep folks posted on all of this. In fact, the minute we stopped writing our state plan, we'll start writing guidance documents, which may need to be tweaked based on feedback from the federal government, but there will be a tremendous amount of guidance, lots of bullets, lots of tables, lots of easy-to-read directions for folks to sort of demystify what do we do next when it comes to ESSA. More Title III big ideas. This is really important piece. I referenced it earlier. Bullet 1 speaks to how do we get teachers positively comfortable and make it a routine to use activities to improve the learning for English learners. They have lots of diverse needs. I've met students that are incredibly communicative and verbal, even though their English is low, and other students that have really taken a very long time. teachers need to know what are the go-to toolkit. And so we will describe that in our state plan. And we have some interesting ideas that's a little too early to share, but we think we have some incentives for teachers so that they may be more inclined to move in this direction if they're not doing that already. States must provide technical assistance. That goes without saying, and despite our lean staff, we will continue to do that. And states must provide recognition to LEAs who improve progress. I like the third bullet I'd like to refer to as our commissioner does, which is appreciative inquiry. When folks across the state are doing good work and it's showing up with real spikes in improvement in their data, we are very interested in developing a process where we go in to appreciate and inquire, how did you do so well? We were able to see that in our high needs group at last year's Smarter Balanced. We saw schools and districts that have really moved the needle on our high needs sort of super group of students. When that happens, it's really important to find out how'd you do it and how can we replicate it. So we're redoubling our commitment to that because appreciative inquiry, I think, has been underappreciated. And so we will definitely have a recognition program related to that. So let's talk about Title III funding. And Jen's giving me the circle about like the hook. It's hard to get going. Allocations ran from $153, boy, you can't do much with that, to $582,000, almost $583,000. Our total allocation, it's not huge, but it's meaningful. It's almost $7 million. We have no reason to believe that that number will decrease. And obviously, you can see the grant is based on the proportion of English learners and immigrant students in each state relative to all states. And so all of our immigrant students are not necessarily English learners, but the funds here can be used to support either group of students. And then we have a poll we're going to just jump right past. So where do these things intersect with Title I, our very large pool of money? First of all, at the federal level, we are provided with greater flexibility on what you can spend money on. And the good news is this leaves room for innovation. Title I funds, I'm going to use one of my favorite examples. In Washington, D.C., a school put together a plan to use Title I funds to put a washer and dryer in the Family Resource Center, and parents actually began to bring their children's clothing in to be washed and dried in the school. Why is that important? If students don't have clean clothes to wear and the family doesn't have money to go to the laundromat and I have to choose between a meal or the laundromat, if I can go do my laundry at school, my child will not be absent the following day. And so these are innovative ways to increase student attendance and a whole variety. Kids have to first and foremost be there, but also innovations in school climate, other ways to protect security, all kinds of interventions related to academics. So I want to talk about really quickly that the CSDE is putting together some cross-divisional teams. We'd like to work, put together our federal and our state grants and work on school improvement activities. This is largely around our alliance districts or more specifically our education reform districts. I have a slide coming up I'll talk about in a moment. We are proposing a combined application process that will be electronic. I've said it before, Connecticut is sadly in last place. We're the only state that has a paper and pencil application process, and we're looking to completely bring that online and make it easier for state districts and LEAs to do the work they need to do. This last slide I'd like to show you is a way, and I used it in our last webinar, is a way to think about how we will differentiate our spending guidance and our support for low-performing schools and districts. Remember, Title I schools are where the highest concentration of poor students, which unfortunately often means students of color or students with English language needs are more concentrated at those schools, and often those schools are low performing. Not in every case, but it's commonly true. We have a 3-tiered system of spending guidance we'd like to propose, and that includes our education reform districts first. We have 10 education reform districts. This is in Ellen's list. It's defined in Section 34 of PA 12-116. That's part of our education legislation from 2012. I'll very quickly read that list. Bridgeport, East Hartford, Hartford, Meriden, New Britain, New Haven, New London, Norwich, Waterbury, and Wyndham. The other Alliance districts will have a little more flexibility. So the place where we'll have the most individualized guidance and the most support on using evidence-based practices and spending is in the ed reform districts. A little greater flexibility will be found for the next tier, which is the other Alliance districts. Those are the remaining 20 districts. And then broad spending and evidence-based practice guidance will go to our other LEAs. It's important to note that all low-performing schools are not found only in the Alliance districts or the ed reform districts. We do have some LEAs that have some significant high needs. We don't like the term subgroup, student groups. Remember, high needs is free and reduced lunch, students with disabilities, English learners. You put them all together, they are our high needs group, and we have LEAs that have significant problems in those areas. They will receive broad spending guidance. If you are identified as needing targeted support, you will get more feedback, more extensive feedback from the department. This is, to our mind, consistent with the CJEF ruling that we need to take as a state, take a balanced hand in both state involvement in education as well as LEA local control. And Connecticut certainly likes its local control, but we need to work together and extensively to try to move the needle on student achievement.
So we're coming to the end of our webinar, and before Ellen answers a couple questions, I'll give her a break and give you some upcoming news. Our next webinar is going to be held in the new year. So we're skipping December and going to January. So it will be held on Tuesday, January 17th. We are going to focus on ESSA Title IV, which is with a specific focus on parts A and B. And then our next webinar, which will be our last one in this series, happy Valentine's Day. You get to spend it with us on February 14th. During this session, we're going to focus on our Connecticut State Plan, our long-term goals, and progress monitoring. And just so you know where you can find our ESSA resources, Ellen referenced it earlier. You can find it on our SDE website.
Can I see this little arrow of mine?
Yeah. There you go, it's moving.
Yep.
And the top 3 links are specifically for ESSA. We have our stakeholder survey in English, then in Spanish. And then if you click that third link, it brings you out to this nice resource page.
This is the third one, the resource page. This is a snapshot of it right here.
And it has a great deal of relevant information, and it also has our recordings of our webinars. So let's jump into a couple questions. And one of them, let me go back a little bit. Under ESSA, can positions funded with Title II continue to be funded if there is a change in personnel as long as the position is not new?
That is a great question. I believe if the position is not new, I'm going to do this. I'm going to actually ask you, I believe the answer is if the position is not new. First of all, the position had to be to reduce class size. So if that position, someone leaves, I believe those funds can be used for it. But we actually have some national consultants we're working with. If you'll send me an email, I will be sure to get a response, and I'll be sure to include this in our next webinar as well.
And then another Title II question was, are teachers limited to the types of professional development they can attend?
As long as it can be tied to the, if you'll recall, an earlier slide said the needs of students at risk, as long as you can draw a line between the professional development the teacher is receiving and the needs of the students. And I would challenge you to not be able to draw a line, even if we're talking a PE teacher who needs to learn more about health or best practices in some sort of cardio aerobic exercise. That's about student health, and you can draw a line to that. I have to tell you, it's a very broad brushstroke of professional development, and most, unless it is completely of a personal interest of the teachers, most times you can draw a straight line between the two.
If you have any other questions that we did not answer, please email either Ellen or myself, and I can make sure she gets it, and we will definitely respond to you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. On that note, we want to thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. Remember, the recording of this webinar will be closed captioned and be posted within the next week in the 3 locations that you can see on your screen. Materials are also posted onto the CT Core Standards website. We look forward to our next webinar on Tuesday, January 17th.
Hard to believe.
I know, it's crazy. Again, thank you to everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks for tuning in. Bye now.